Okay, so I wanted to put together a little demo to explain how to map out a sketch of at least 3 rectilinear volumes, all intersecting, because it seems like some folks are still having a little bit of a hard time with that. So what I figured I would do is show you in a video using a pen so you can see real precision and just exactly how I'm mapping this out. So in these sketches, that first volume that you draw is going to really provide kind of like the key for the perspective of the rest of the sketch. And there are a couple things to keep in mind with that. So we'll get all these lines in here. First, connect this to the back corner. So one of those things is that at this point, we've got 2-point perspective. So you've got lines moving kind of to the upper right of your page and lines moving to the upper left. And once you establish those lines on this first volume, you really want to make sure that you're going back to reference those lines for everything else that you draw. The other thing to know is that these lines should be truly vertical, so they should be running parallel to the edge of the page. For me, I was going to think about waiting on the line weight until the very end, but I think I'm going to go ahead and let there be some darker line weight along the bottom edge of this first volume, because these sketches can become a little bit challenging to visually interpret if you don't use the line weight to your advantage. So the darkest lines are going to be along the bottom edge of your volume, and then the lightest lines will be those hidden lines that you can see kind of with your x-ray vision back here. And of course, this back corner lets us know if we got our perspective pretty perfect, and you can see mine is a little bit out of place, so that's something to be mindful of. So the first thing we're going to do is draw in, I guess we've got a wedge, a pierce, and a cradle. A pierce is maybe a nice place to start, so I'm going to figure out where I want that intersection to be. And the way I like to start this is by drawing in really the meeting place where those 2 volumes will intersect each other. At this point, you have a couple options, but I'm going to actually, following the perspective that I set up with that initial volume, I'm going to just draw in the negative space. And this will let me project out from these planes. So now we know what that negative space within the volume is going to look like. At this point, I'm drawing the top plane and the bottom plane, and then drawing that vertical line. Follow the perspective of this line. And we can draw in that back face. So we'd have a vertical line there, another vertical line here. One of the challenges with the pierce in particular, if you have kind of a smaller volume, is that it can start to bend as it moves through space. So we're going to try to avoid that. And then here at the front, we're going to do exactly the same thing. So we're going to project out. I'm going to keep that in perspective with this. Project out in perspective with that. I'm going to come in with a vertical line here. In perspective with this. In perspective with this. In perspective. And then have a vertical line. So something to keep in mind here is that this line that we established right at the beginning is where our second volume pierces our first volume. So that's going to help us kind of keep visual track of our sketch. So we've got one pierce that's working pretty well, it seems like. We could do a wedge and a cradle. So maybe what we'll do is come in over here with a wedge. So I think I'll put something in here, roughly. So in very much the same way, I'm going to look on this volume and kind of define where that wedge is going to intersect our first volume. So with those two perspective lines, I was looking at like, this is our perspective, so this is where we're going to go. And I actually want this wedge to go pretty far into the volume. So we're going to really define that space that it's going to be occupying. And I would like that to go all the way through. So I'm going to draw in those back lines. And I can even do that back here too. Being careful to really make sure that we're paying attention to that perspective throughout. And this is another one of these back lines that can tell us if we're getting things right or not. So this next step is where people can get a little bit confused. With the volume that you're drawing into this negative space, you have to start to figure out what size the faces of those volumes is going to be. So what I like to do is I'm going to take this top edge of the top of that negative space. I'm going to extend that perspective line out for ways, and then I'm going to start to figure out just exactly how big is that face going to be. I'm going to extend this out a little bit too. I'm going to take this as a reference and make sure I'm drawing my perspective line in perspective, so agreeing with the rest of my sketch, visually agreeing. So here now we have kind of this top volume. So we're going to look at the corners of that top volume, and this again is where that volume is intersecting the first volume. So this can start to get a little visually tricky. But from here what we can do is actually come down with a straight vertical line and extend this back line to meet it. And here, because we know another one of our corners is right here, we're going to do the same thing, and that's lining pretty closely up with the corner of our initial volume, so that can get a little visually confusing. But we're going to come back and so from here, this top corner, I'm going to come down with a straight line. So, and this is again where making sure your perspective is really correct is going to be really helpful. And these things can start to become very visually confusing. So as we look at this whole volume, we remember that like these are the edges of that original block that we had there. And then we can start to see one face and the other face. So what I'm going to do to try to make that a little bit more clear is maybe outline, sort of highlight our volumes that are intersecting our primary volume. So we've got this pierce, back here. Which I think is visually a bit more clear. And then we've got this wedge. And the one thing I'm not highlighting with the Sharpie is that initial volume. And this, I think, just really starts to show how important that line weight is to make sure that you can really see what you're sketching. Now, the one intersection we haven't kind of charted out yet is a cradle. And so I think what I'll do is come back over here to this back edge, and we're still going back to the perspective of that initial volume to really give us a visual reference. And I'm still going to follow all of the process that I've been following for the other two. So being careful to check your perspective as you draw it in, using some really nice line weight to show your hidden lines. And now we have this negative space where we know that we want another volume to kind of intersect with the rest of the composition. So in this case, I'm going to come up here. We're not going to make a huge volume. But maybe something roughly like that. So now we've got kind of that back wall of that volume. Here I'm going to come out. And we'll define that, the vertical here. And again, we're keeping in mind that this is really like where that volume is intersecting with the other one. So now we've got our corners. We're going to come back in perspective, back in perspective. And put our vertical in there. And put these back lines in. So now we've got just a barely floating volume here. And the perspective should be kind of visually agreeing again with the rest of the sketch. It's a little bit defying gravity, so that might draw some of our attention away. But this now shows us all three different kinds of intersections. And so maybe what we'll do here is outline this one with this different color pink. And I need some fresher Sharpies. Sorry, I was leaning right in front of it here. So that's kind of where we're winding up. This can be a little bit difficult to see, and that is certainly one of the reasons why this kind of sketch can be a little extra complex. So we haven't talked too much, we haven't talked at all really about using underlays, but I think what I'm going to do is use this as an underlay and just make a slightly more refined sketch so you can really see these intersections and what they look like on a more finished sketch. So I'll make that into a different